began with a lecture on the three Sarahs, the women that we recognize as our founders. We had a roundtable conversation on our African American history and our sort of integrated history of the late 1980s. That really is where we pick up this evening as we begin to have a conversation on our very important LGBT history and legacy. And we are so very happy to have a wonderful group of panelists. Ted Keller, Pat Patrick, Charlie Smith, Linda Tetner, and Warren Gress. We will kick off this conversation in this time of reflection together with some opening words by Linda Tetner, who's going to talk a little bit about the context historically for the LGBT community in Charleston in sort of the late 80s when we began to become an affirming congregation, and talk just a little bit about that from her perspective. But before we begin, let us begin, friends, with a prayer. So the Lord be with you. Let us pray. Good and gracious God, we give you thanks this day for the LGBTQIA community. We thank you for their gifts and all that you have given them. We thank you for St. Stephen's and for the place of welcome that it has become over the last few decades. Help us today, tomorrow, and always to strive to truly be an inclusive house of prayer for all people, just as we are created. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. And with that, I invite Linda Kettner to come forward.
Thank you. I am going to read much of this, and I'll tell you why. I'm going back to 1983, and trying to get 15 years in with the way I can wander is dangerous. So I'm going to read it to you, and I think it'll be more concise and more accurate. St. Stephen's is, without a doubt, the champion LGBTQ welcoming congregation. That's a given. And our LGBTQ history, like most histories, has successes as well as some bumps in the road, which I'll bring up. I think it's important that we remember and appreciate that some of the earliest and best champions in our LGBTQ St. Stephen's story are the African American vestry members who first voted to welcome a white priest and white parishioners into their traditionally African American church, and in 1998 were asked to be a welcoming congregation to LGBTQ people, when LGBTQ people are at best troublesome in most black churches. Thank you for teaching us about Christ's inclusion by saying yes to both of those things. So some early history. Reverend Houghton, were any of you here when he was here? 3, 4 of us. Okay, good. Was rector here between 1987 and 1993 and stayed involved for years and years. Alan and I developed a very, very deep and personal friendship working closely together at Crisis Ministries, now 180 Place, from 1983 forward. And Alan was the reason I became an Episcopalian. And early in 1989, I, who had been so deeply in the closet that I was a garment bag, came out to Alan. He was caring, he was supportive, he was loving, until I told him I planned to come all the way out and to be public. He strongly cautioned me not to even think about doing that, out of concern that I would lose my ability to make impact on other social and civic issues that I cared deeply about, and he argued that my reputation would be diminished or extinguished by people's prejudice. Against my better judgment, I took his advice. I came out to my family, but I stayed in the closet like most every LGBTQ person in Charleston at the time until 1998, when we started Alliance for Full Acceptance, our acronym AFA. We, being myself, Warren Redmond Gress, Jim Redmond Gress, who's hiding in the back, there you are, okay, Jim Redmond Gress, Charlie Smith, Ted Keller, Tom Myers, and former nun Lynn Moldenhauer. 6 of the 7 of us were St. Stephen's congregants. We began AFA with a massive ad campaign. Our faces were on billboards. We did direct mail with our faces. We did radio and television interviews, ads. We grew from 7 out LGBTQ members to hundreds in the first year, and then thousands. So I think the 1998 vestry statement of inclusion and that 6 of the 7 AFA leadership were St. Stephen's congregants attracted other LGBTQ people to St. Stephen's as a welcoming church. That and Charlie was so cute, they couldn't resist. And that year, Alan wrote something that stunned us all. He wrote an editorial entitled Where I Stand, encouraging LGBTQ inclusion, but against same-sex marriage. And it's important to realize that this was the stance of most liberal priests on the liberal side. It was the stance of most liberal priests in the dioceses. I don't have a copy of Where I Stand. I looked madly for it, but I do speak to much of its content in my response to Alan about Where I Stand. I said in an email to him, "Now, sir, about your Where I Stand editorial, I was in the amen chorus until you got the part about us not being allowed to marry because of history, custom, and emotion. The first thing that came into my mind was Sojourner's Truth, and ain't I a woman? Well, ain't I? Am I, in your eyes, unequal civilly? Am I unequal in your opinion in the eyes of God? Am I, for some reason, unsuited to decide who I love, who I want to commit my life to, who I will celebrate my devotion to in community? No, I don't think so." Then I thought of the Reverend Houghton, rector of St. Michael's in the 1850s, who said, "Slavery is sanctioned by God. Slavery has existed throughout history. It is our custom, our way of life, and our rights as good Southerners to maintain our traditions." Sort of reminded me of, Alan, of your marriage is for males and females. There is too much history and custom and emotion here to try to amend or break that definition. Of course I disagree. As you know, all kinds of misdeeds have been done in the name of history, custom, and emotion, and this is just another one. Then you really lost me when you decided it was okay to bless me and wrote that after all, we bless dogs and shrimp boats. Oh, Lordy, Alan, comparing me, my love, my fidelity, my promises before God with dogs and shrimp boats? Not a good idea. I continued. I know with absolute certainty that God loves me. I know, too, that many, many lifelong commitments among women I have known are deeper, richer, and more spiritual than many of the heterosexual couples I have known. And I know that I have a right to be married, just like you, sanctioned by the state, sanctioned by God, and sanctioned by this community. Alan, please look more deeply. What is it that you think is so different about me that I should be excluded from marriage? Is it truly custom, history, and emotion? I know you and have for a very long, long time, and you would never argue those puny excuses for social or civil injustice. What is it? And I signed, "Love your sorry butt," a lot. Okay, so we started our dialogue on religion and sexual orientation early. This was very early. And when the Diocesan Convention of 1998 convened here in South Carolina, the schism between those supporting LGBTQ inclusion and those who did not began to boil, and it did boil. LGBT ordination, blessings, marriage, all were denounced, often in very disrespectful, sometimes in very vile ways. That's 1998. The voices of St. Stephen's Vestry through Charlie Smith and senior clergyman Reverend Colton Smith. Is he here? Those two were the lone voices in 1998 at the diocesan convention on behalf of us. Only two. And they began then, and they continued to fight until the schism occurred in 2012. And fight they did. Change came cautiously for LGBTQ people in the first decade at St. Stephen's. And it came, and we can get into some of that, and I hope some of the others will. And it came with fearless leadership by that original vestry in 1998, a few clergy, and many, many LGBTQ people asking, begging, demanding for inclusion. But it built, and it built to the crescendo of welcome that it is today, which it is. We did, and so deeply do appreciate the open-armed champions for LGBT inclusion that St. Stephen's has become and that we get to live in and with now. Yeah.
Well, I can't thank you enough for those comments. I must say, we shared earlier, I was ordained in this diocese 23 years ago and was in the middle of what you were describing, and I cannot put words to how intense it was at the time. And so knowing what it felt like then and knowing the courage it took to speak truth, quite something. So, thank you, Linda. Charlie. Ted and Warren. Yep. We would like to launch off of Linda's comments and organize our time together into two groups. Discussion groups. We can all come up, but we're going to center on talking between the mid-1980s to roughly, what will you say, year 2000, ballpark, kind of what happened during that time. And then we will stop and kind of re-gear towards from then to the present day. And the panel is divided up where some people can better speak to those time periods than others because of just experiences, relationships within the church. So Warren and Linda, Charlie will probably talk about the first time period. So I'd like to invite the panel up just to come up and sit in front of everybody, right here, in your Inquisition chairs. Yeah. And what we'll do is Adam has a handheld mic, and we would like to just kind of stimulate some conversation. We'll just get it started with a question or two, and people will share. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean. Yeah, well, we'll see. Doesn't mean you can't say anything during the first part of it. You could share some experiences, but you'll probably talk more about the second half just because that's when you're here. Adam has a mic, and we'd like you to speak into the mic so that you can be recorded via our online system. So let me just begin with Linda's thoughts. St. Stephen's has always had an identity for 200 years of being a house of prayer for all people. And as Linda said, it was the black community that first began to live that out within the white community by inviting LGBTQ people into the church to worship together. And as Linda said, it became a very welcoming place, but within the Diocese of South Carolina, it was not a welcoming place. It was a hostile environment. And the issue of human sexuality was something that clergy were running from, because by many of them expressing their true opinion on it, they had to also come out. And it was going to affect their careers. So the diocesan bishop and most clergy looked down upon St. Stephen's Church at that time. For a clergy person to come here, they were, quote, blacklisted. And for parishioners to come here, they had to have a different view of the faith. This is me saying this. This is just my view on it. They were willing to speak the truth and live out their faith in a more courageous way. So my first question, just to get us started, and we've got to put a little bit of time frame on this because we've got roughly 30 minutes left. So we want each of you to explain your experiences, but we'll do the first part maybe within 15, 20 minutes and the second part within that roughly same time period. So just kind of keep that in mind. So here's the question. So what was it like during this great period of conflict, when openly gay people were excluded from being part of the churches within the Diocese of South Carolina, for you? And we'd just like you to share your experiences and your memory of that time period.
Thank you, Adam and Greg, and thank you all from St. Stephen's for inviting us to be here tonight. It was a surprise and an honor to be asked, and I'm thankful to be here with my husband and with my parents, who are also here tonight. My parents, of course, were here when all of this was going on. I had been living in Miami for about a dozen years, and my partner had died from AIDS in 1995 on Easter Day. And I decided I'd wait a year before I made any big decisions on what I was going to do in terms of where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do since I was alone again. And I made the decision that I wanted to come home, because I wanted to be somewhere close to family, but I also wanted to be somewhere where I could live my life authentically and hopefully peacefully without conflict over this LGBTQ issue. And the first week that I was back, I met a drag queen by the name of Marcy Montrell. And Marcy Montrell said, "Oh, if you're Episcopalian and you're going to be living in Charleston, you need to go to St. Stephen's, and I'll introduce you to some folks that will tell you all about it." And he introduced me to Karen and Kevin Eichmann. And Karen was actually Iris Carson's daughter. And Iris, of course, was here at St. Stephen's. And they all said this was where I needed to be, that this would be the welcoming place, and that I could live authentically here, and it would be a good place for me, and that there probably wasn't anywhere else in the diocese where that was going to happen. So I made a decision fairly quickly thereafter to move my membership here. I'd been at Trinity Cathedral in Miami, and I moved it up here. And I began pretty quickly to get involved in the life of the church here, because this was going to be my home. And I had hoped that that the congregation was I really thought there would probably be more people here who were gay. There were some, and there were some who weren't out. But I felt like it was a place where you could, you know, where a community could start anyway, and then, you know, we could build. And we did. And I met Warren and Jim and Ted and Linda and Tom Myers, who actually played a pretty big role in all of this, because Tom was running We Are Family for LGBTQ kids, which was pretty astounding for 1995. We didn't have any such thing in Miami. And when I came here and saw that Tom was able to do that here, I really had hope that things were going to be good here, and that the city and the community was moving in the right direction. And through the associations with Tom and the people that I met here at St. Stephen's, a lot of things started to get done. The community started to be more open. And by the way, a lot of us had either just moved here or moved back here about 1995, 96. So we were kind of starting fresh. And we just wanted the community to be more open than it actually was. And it was a pretty heavy lift to get it done. And there were folks here at St. Stephen's that even though the numbers grew pretty rapidly for LGBTQ people in that time period, that really hadn't been the plan, and there were people here who really didn't know what to do with that. That wasn't, you know, there were African American families here that when they opened the doors for basically what was gentrification, they didn't see that coming. You know, they didn't see us coming. But if you think about it, there really wasn't anywhere else for us to go. So we came here. And, you know, you wonder why that thing's over the door that says a house of worship for all people, is because the others weren't. They weren't a house of worship for all people, a house of prayer for all people. They were very exclusive, and St. Stephen's wasn't. And I think what I'd say overall about my experience here is that while we've had some really excruciating times, and there was some real violence, some emotional and spiritual violence that was done to LGBTQ people here in the 90s, St. Stephen's always made room for anybody who wanted to be here. And we were able to build that community, and while we weren't able to do it with the Diocese of South Carolina, those of us who were here were able to find a place that we could build a community, and we built AFA, and we helped keep We Are Family going, and they're both still going to this day. We helped get statewide organizations going that have supported LGBTQ people all over South Carolina. But by and large, it came out of the 6 or 7 people that were in this congregation. So, you know, it is a house of prayer for all people, and it provided that space that gave us the ability to kind of live and move and have our being here as we authentically were. And, you know, it's been over 20 years, and we're still here. So thank you.
My journey into St. Stephen's was a little different. I didn't really come here for the House of Prayer for All People. I came here for a job. And actually, I was fresh. A lot of you know this. I was fresh out of leaving the ministry in New York as a Roman Catholic priest, and had come here and had a couple of different suggestions from friends of mine that I should, you know, contact the Episcopal Diocese here, because the Episcopal Diocese in New York was so welcoming of LGBTQ people. And so I made an appointment, met with Bill Skilton, actually. And I was looking for sort of an administrative kind of job. I wasn't really looking for ministries as such. And he's like, oh, no, you really need to think about, you know, becoming an Episcopal priest. And I want you to meet all these different people who have gone through the process, and it's really simple. And then he takes me over to meet Ed Salmon, and we sit down in Ed Salmon's office. And he's like, oh, this is a great idea, you know, because we could always use, you know, another body in the ministry here. And then he said to me, and who is your family? And when I said, well, I moved here with my partner, Jim, and his grandmother and his aunt, he just sat back and said, well, then I don't think there's a place here for you. And so I left. And then I answered one ad in the newspaper for work in a local church, and it was, I guess I can say this, it was Holy Communion. And I met with the rector there, and again, it was like an administrative job or whatever. And he went through, this is great, you're going to love it here, as an ex-Roman, this is going to be, you'll fit right in. And then he said, and who do you live with? And I told him, and he said, yeah, I don't think that's a good fit here. And then I answered the last ad, which actually Jenny Olbrich had put into the paper, and I showed up here, and we went through the interview, and I was kind of expecting that I was going to get the same response, and I didn't. Jenny's question was, how easy will it be for you to accept direction from a woman? Her vision of Roman clergy, I guess, was not great. I gave her the number for a few nuns I knew and said, here, talk to them. See how I do. But anyway, so I came here, and I think part of the thing that both Linda and Charlie have alluded to is really that the experience for the LGBT community here has been much more organic than like a simple decision like, yes, we're going to welcome. Because it has gone with fits and starts. And when I first got here, Jenny had said to me, I think she said to you one day that this was not going to become the gay church for the diocese. But she did say to me, is there some way we can let people know that they're welcome here? And I said to her, are we talking about putting a rainbow flag in the window? What are we doing here? And so she was genuinely concerned. How do we let people know? And my response to her, and I've had these conversations with ministry people through AFA, actually throughout the area, my first response to her was, before we put the sign up and tell people that we're welcoming, let's make sure people are welcoming. We don't want to invite people into a situation where they may not end up that way. And it really has been an experience. Ultimately, though, Jim and I did become members of the church here. Our son was baptized here. Through the different priests that were in charge here, and then ultimately and Jim Bills, who became the rector again after the church went back to parish status. We did experience really a church that has been incredibly welcoming, but it is something that is not always an easy thing for people to live with, because I've had people say to me, "Well, could I really invite other people here to this church if I don't think they're going to be welcoming of gays and lesbians?" Those are real questions that the church has had to go through, and I would just want to mention I think the symbol to me that the church had sort of come pretty far along was during the time when the split was happening, and there was a church meeting one day, and many of you probably remember this, after church, and the question was, would St. Stephen's sort of go with those who were separating or not? And Charles Shine stood over there, where he almost always, he sat over there. He stood up, and I'm not going to do justice to his actual words, but by and large, it was, these are our brothers and sisters we are talking about. We cannot leave our family. And I knew at that point that a lot of the questions that folks had, and a lot of the questions that folks in the African American community had about the whole welcoming and stretching thing is, that some of those things had really come to fruition, and people had dealt with a lot of questions. And I think one of the things that made a difference along the way, and I'll just mention this one thing, and that was when we had more and more LGBTQ families raising children. Because I remember, when we'd bring Chris in, as an infant, we'd get to the door, and usually Alice Drayton and Emma Watson would grab him and take him to the parish house. And they'd always say, oh, because, you don't want to be distracted during church. And then a couple of weeks after they started doing this, I stopped them and I said, you're really just checking to make sure he's still in one piece every week. I know this because you think he's being raised by wolves. And because how did two men raise a child? But Alice pulled me aside and said, no, you need to know you're doing the right thing. And I thought, wow, that was pretty good. And Emma pulled me aside once. They were at our house for something around Christopher's Adoption Day or whatever. We used to do this party every year. And Emma reminded me that we were a family just like she had a family. And I think the family connection and the family example was really big for us. And I think it really helped change some of the ideas that people had. You know, who are these people who are coming in here? They are just like us.
Well, Warren, let me first say that I'm glad that we do now have a sign. There's a rainbow flag right on the office building right there that lets people know that we are now open for business for the LGBTQ community. My history comes a bit later than you guys. 2005 is when Mike and I joined the church. And it was shortly after that that I was selected for this thing called the vestry, which I didn't know much about, not being an Episcopalian, not quite sure how that worked. And it was an incredible experience, but one of the first things, of course, that we did was to select the delegates for the infamous convention where the vote was taken on which churches would stay and which churches would go. So we go to the convention. I'm there with David Williams, who is our rector, and the other delegates who are sitting there with me. And we're sitting there and listening to all of the presentation, the resolutions that were being proposed that, you know, had lots and lots of verbiage, lots of smoke screen around what the real issue was. And so, you know, those of us in the LGBTQ, and we've got so many acronyms now, if I just say queer folk, would that be okay? That we're used to being excluded. We're used to discrimination. But I had seen the light. I came to St. Stephen's. I saw what it was like to have a church experience where that was not a part of it. So to see going back and hearing what was happening, seeing what was going on, and then the vote that was taken, I said to David, who was sitting right next to me, I said, you know, this is really painful. And David, in his attempt to be, you know, reconciling, said, Pat, don't take it too personal. And I thought, but it is very personal. And I mean, he was doing it in the kindest way to try and just kind of spare the pain for the moment. And so I thought about it, and I thought, you know, I had prepared a few comments, like Linda. I come very prepared to make sure that I stay in script. I had prepared a few words, not ever thinking I would have the courage to go stand in front of hundreds of people facing Mark Lawrence and saying something about what was happening. So I said, okay, God, this is you. So I just got up, went to the hall, well, the aisle where the microphones were set up, and just looked at Mark Lawrence, who we had met many, many times, and then I went into my spiel. I have it here if you're interested in hearing it, of what I said to him. It was just a few minutes, but it was basically to say how disheartening it was to sit here and watch what was going on, to once again experience institutional prejudice, discrimination, or at the very least, indifference to what was going on, and really disenfranchising a group of people to say that we're less than and we were not deserving of full inclusion in all the different levels of stewardship that the diocese had to offer. I also used a term that he coined to beat us up a little bit called indiscriminate inclusivity. And I thought, isn't that what Jesus was about? It's like, you know, it's a word that I truly love and think that we ought to have T-shirts made up that says we practice indiscriminate inclusivity. So anyway, the vote was taken, and obviously we know what happened, and so we went through that process. Fast forward to 2019, when I had a chance to serve on the Bishop Search Committee, as we began looking for our first full-time bishop for this diocese. And I was on a committee with an incredible group of clergy and lay people who were from various churches throughout the diocese, many of which lost their church, lost many of their family, lost the relationship with many of their family members, with their friends, their community, and the church building that they were so used to going and worshiping. And they left all of that because they thought it was important to stand up for what was right. So I can't say that we sometimes don't feel a little guilty, that maybe we have caused this in some way, but we're reminded often, no. It's standing up for the truth that caused this, not people like you. But it was a humbling experience for these folks that lost everything, but they were going to stand up for what was right no matter what. So we worked very close together to make sure that we got the right bishop. And I don't know about you, but I think we did. Somebody that's just amazing. So it's been an amazing transformation during that time frame, but one that just seemed like the right thing, right? It's all divine guidance. So I thank God that we're here today. I thank God that we have a sign that advertises that we're open, and it's a pleasure to worship with all of you.
Well, my experience is a little bit different in a lot of ways, and I won't give my whole biography here. But I grew up happily in a small town in upstate, what became the United Methodist Church, and moved to Charleston after various jaunts through education. And was happily going to Circular Congregational Church, very happily going there. And loved Bert Keller, and we claimed each other as cousins. But somehow or another, I never never asked to transfer my letter. I never went through confirmation. And one Christmas Eve, it was Christmas Eve of 2000, I got the schedule mixed up for the Christmas Eve service, and I remember that Warren and Jim said, you really need to come to St. Stephen's, sometime, and just check us out. It really is quite a wonderful place. I think you and Jim Bills would get on, which we did. I love Jim Bills. And so I came on Christmas Eve, and it was just getting ready to start. I walked into the doors, and the first two people I met were Kathy Hicks and Iris Carson. That sort of says it all, as far as, to have that kind of welcome and to see those two faces who became very dear to me. And so it wasn't long after that I became a member of the church, and I went through confirmation with Jim Bills. And it honestly, and I still feel this way in some ways, it wasn't to be an Episcopalian, even though my mother was born and raised in Columbia, South Carolina. She was a loyal member of Trinity Cathedral, and took me there when I was a kid going to Granny's house. And so I had all this Anglican Episcopalian stuff inside me, and but I walked into this church, and Don White, in all of his greatness, was playing this massive prelude, and Herbert, you had the incense going, and Devon, Kathy's oldest son, I'm pretty sure was the crucifer. And I thought, oh my goodness, I found my place. And I never turned back. I've been coming ever since Christmas Eve of 2000. And as time went on, I really stayed out of the fray. It's not that what was going on in the church and in the diocese didn't bother me. It did, but I just felt like it distracted my feelings about being here and coming here every Sunday. And I let Charlie, God bless him, I just love Charlie's spirit. And I said, Charlie can fight, and I don't have it in me. And so so the rest is history. I love this place. It's been an important part of my transformation in my religious life, and it continues to be.
Before we Sir? Yeah. So before we give up the mic, would you like to share any personal experiences? Or okay, thank you. Well, Adam, do you want to come up now, or do you want to try and do one more?
Sort of let the Spirit move.
Yes, yes. Good.
Thank you so very much for all the comments you've already made that I think give us a nice sense of the diversity of experience represented in this panel, but also how St. Stephen's in many ways evolved and embraced its identity that it is today, an identity of a church that is indiscriminately inclusive today. When I was applying for rector for this church, that was on the website. that was one of the signs that you sent out that I found so appealing. And now with the election of Bishop Ruth, it does really feel like we're moving into a different place. I would love Warren, Charlie, and Linda. I want to get with Pat and Ted a little bit more to speak about the LGBT witness that St. Stephen's embraces today and in our more recent history. But I wonder, Warren, Charlie, and Linda, if there are particular memories or moments in your time at St. Stephen's during the late 80s and 90s that stand out for you, that sort of speak to the community that St. Stephen's was at the time. Is there a fond memory or something that comes to mind that sort of speaks to who we were in that era? Go ahead, Charlie.
Thank you. Do all of you know about the vestry statement that was made by St. Stephen's?
I don't think so, yeah.
I happen to have a copy. Somewhere. And, it's interesting to me looking back on this because I keep everything. So I'd look back on these and to see the dates on them is very interesting now to be able to look back on these things historically. But this is a statement that was written in 1999. So, it didn't take long for St. Stephen's to get it. I think people here understood that there were some awful things that were happening, and with this, it was clear that at some point the diocese was going to split, and that people were going to have to stand up or move on. And I can tell you that I don't have a date on this, but I think it was 1999. It says, "We, the undersigned members of the vestry of St. Stephen's Episcopal Church, Charleston, South Carolina, make the following statement in response to the Lambeth Conference resolution on human sexuality passed on August 5th, 1998, and to subsequent related resolutions adopted by the Episcopal Diocese of South Carolina at the Diocesan Convention of 1999. With all due respect to the member bishops of the 1998 Lambeth Conference and to the delegates of the 1999 Diocesan Convention of the Diocese of South Carolina, we, the vestry of St. Stephen's Episcopal Church, Charleston, register our dissent against the above-named resolution and subsequent related diocesan resolutions which deny the Church's blessing of same-gender unions and the sacrament of ordination to all who are called to serve the Church as a deacon, presbyter, or bishop, regardless of their sexual orientation or their commitment to the charism of celibacy. We are serious about living into our baptismal covenant to strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being. Therefore, it is our responsibility to speak the truth about God as we understand that truth revealed through the life, works, and words of Christ Jesus. While we are governed by the canons and resolutions of the conventions of the Episcopal Church USA and our own diocese, we, the vestry of St. Stephen's Episcopal Church, Charleston, condemn homophobia. God calls some homosexual people to live together in lifelong committed relationships and to serve the church in ordained ministry. The church can and does appropriately bless such unions and ordain those who are called. We support the clergy and congregations who do so. Recognizing that not all agree with us, the Vestry of St. Stephen's Church, Charleston, supports a continuing process of prayerful and respectful discernment concerning the church's teaching on the various expressions of human sexuality. Any such process must include the voices of openly lesbian and gay persons at all levels of discussion. The gospel of Jesus Christ demands inclusion. The mission and ministry of St. Stephen's Vestry cannot be strengthened by the wholesale exclusion of any group of people. We commit ourselves to strengthen the bonds of mutual affection that tie us together as members of the Anglican Communion. The Vestry of St. Stephen's Episcopal Church, Charleston. A copy of this statement shall be sent to the Most Reverend George L. Carey, Archbishop of Canterbury, the Most Reverend Frank T. Griswold III, Presiding Bishop of the Episcopal Church, the Right Reverend Edward L. Salmon, Bishop of the Diocese of South Carolina, and to the deans of the deaneries of the Episcopal Diocese of South Carolina. That was pretty powerful stuff, and still is, frankly. It really is. And when you look at it as we're doing today in an historical context, it's pretty astounding that had happened and when it happened.
Do you have the names of the members of the vestry on that letter?
No, but I'm sure we can get it.
Who was the rector at that time?
That was Jim Bills. Yep. Warren, Linda, any other things you'd like to add about your time at St. Stephen's?
I don't know that there's any sort of event, but I'm going to say that my experience has really been those one-on-one moments with individuals who just have been so incredibly welcoming, certainly to me, to Jim, and obviously to our son. But I just want to add one thing, and that's something that I learned in my time here, and that is that that indiscriminate inclusivity is something we have to kind of recommit to all the time, because it's not something that is like this magic blanket that all of a sudden we're going to be very inclusive, because there's going to come someone through the door that is different than everyone else is here. If that is possible, but somehow it is going to be happening. And that inclusivity has got to extend to that individual. So it's just, and I think that to me is really the key to the spirit of St. Stephen's. It's that willingness to keep opening up again and again and again. And I found that so many times in our time here.
Thank you very much, Warren. So in 2003, that was a significant moment in the life of the wider church, because that was the year that Gene Robinson was consecrated the diocesan bishop in New Hampshire, and that caused quite a stir in the wider church, and I would say accelerated what was already happening in this diocese. But St. Stephen's clearly was not going back, and one of the memorable early experiences that I had when I arrived as rector in 2017, I arrived in the month of August, was 1 month into my time as rector, it was time for the Charleston Pride Parade. And I had come from serving as rector in a pretty small little southern town in North Carolina, and we had some pride events, but they were fledgling little operations. And then I show up at St. Stephen's, and 1 month into my time as rector here, I participate in St. Stephen's Pride, and I was blown away by the presence that St. Stephen's had marching right down King Street, and the impact that presence continues to have particularly on young people. I mean, my favorite part of the parade is always when we are marching past Marion Square, because that's usually where most of the college students are. And they just hoop and holler because they know instinctively that churches are some of the most subversive participants in that parade. But I wonder, particularly Pat, if you could speak to the evolution of our participation and pride in more recent years.
Gladly. And kind of to spin off what Warren said, I think it is time that we take this whole spirit of indiscriminate inclusivity out into the world, which is what we've been doing with the Pride Parade. We have been participating since day one, first under the leadership of Wayne Helmley, our organist, and then Diane Agapor and I took it over about 2 years after that, and the two of us, along with Mike and some other members of the church, have been leading that charge ever since. To watch this parade and watch this church grow in its participation has been phenomenal. We had 100 of you people that showed up this year to march with us. And what makes it so powerful is that it's everybody, which is what this church is about. They're gay, they're straight, they're black, they're white, they're families with children, all with the same idea, to get out there and show the Charleston community that St. Stephen's is truly a house of prayer for all people. When you look at what's happening in the gay community, and we have to realize that we're a bit insulated in St. Stephen's, we're not like the real world. Look at the schisms that are happening in every major religion and stuff that's happening out there. People are still hurt for who they are. There's still 22 countries out there where you can be put to death for being gay or lesbian. The world is changing, but it's changing slowly. And it's because of people like us that need to be out there and be visible that it's going to continue to change and move in the right direction. But we have a powerful presence, as Adam said. In fact, I was standing next to Adam with that first parade, and he looked at me and he said, "This is what I'm here for." We could never do this in Burlington. And having the priests march with us in collar, with Bishop Ruth marching with us this year, sends a very clear message, not just in-house, but also, excuse the expression, outhouse, to let people know that we are accepting. And you can see in the eyes of people, even though the streets are lined, it's amazing how you can connect with the various folks in their eyes and see the acceptance and see the tears and see the love that we're conveying to them by our presence out in the community. Now, when you look at things like the Family Acceptance Project that has helped to verify what we already know, the single most determining factor of depression and suicide among young people is the lack of acceptance from their family. Well, where do their values come from? It comes from the church. So our presence is making an incredible difference. Now, if we can just get the Pride Committee itself to give us a little bit of time on stage so that the faith communities that do participate can come together and start the event with prayer. Let people know that there are churches out there that are accepting. I know I can go on and on, but it's been a labor of love to be involved in that particular committee. And if you've not participated, please come join the largest outreach that we do here at St. Stephen's as far as numbers. It is truly, truly a blessing to participate.
It really is incredible what Pat and Mike put together with a lot of help. Diane Agapor has been such a cheerleader. Susan Rourke, Adam has just fell right in line, right behind our banner, and he's there every year. I want to go back to a time when I'd been happily coming here. It's probably 2002 or 2003. There were two young fellows really big in the gay community here. They were really well known, well loved. They had been in a partnership for years, and they lived out in Riverland Terrace, sort of near the windmill, and just the loveliest guys. And they were really close to Iris Carson, and they were really close to Jim Bills. And one of the things that they really spearheaded was the breakfast that we used to do at now 180 place, but was called Crisis Ministries, which Linda Kettner was one of the founders of. They were just delightful, and they were big members of this church. And one day, tragically, Kevin was walking back from sort of the waterfront and fell in the yard, and he had an aneurysm, and Jim Bills was with him for about 48 hours, and he had to be taken off of life support, and he died. I was crushed, and so it was just like sent shockwaves through the gay community here. So many gay men knew and loved Danny and Kevin. Kevin was the one who died. And for their service, Jim, and I'm not going to try to paraphrase, but Jim Bills made a point of looking out into and it was packed, that's what I should say. I mean, there was no room. People were standing up against the walls. There were so many people in this community that loved Kevin Murphy and loved Danny, his partner. And so all of these gay folks were packed in this church who'd probably not been in a church in years. And Jim Bills took the opportunity to look out into the congregation and to say very pointedly, and he looked at Danny. Danny was sitting right where Rob is, and said, if any of you here think that your relationship, your love, is any less than this man's was for Kevin, then you've got a long way to go. And he really wrapped his arms in a congregational way around Kevin and Danny. And it meant so much to these folks in the congregation who had not been to church, that were sort of blown away by it. And to this day, we have members who came to St. Stephen's because of Jim Bill's funeral service for Kevin Murphy. That was a really pivotal moment for me and for a lot of people, but it just goes to show that we meant it. We've been walking the talk for a while, and Adam continues to lead us in that walking of the talk.
We're nearing the end of our time, but I would like to make a little space to ask if there's anybody who has a question or two for our panelists. Yep.
I just have a quick comment. I heard the phrase, "we felt guilty." No one should ever feel guilty for standing up for the great commandment and the teachings of Jesus.
Greg, Robert.
Thank you. The sun is right in my eyes, so I'll turn a little. Thanks to all of you for being here, and Adam and the whole church for sponsoring this. I knew Tom Myers way back when, and We Are Family. His crematory plaque is in the back here now. And my question is, what was the parallel relationship of We Are Family with Tom and AFA, time-wise, or the chronology and the interactions there? Because we lost a good man with Tom Myers.
Actually, the third week I was here, I was working in the back here, and this stranger walks in the back door and says, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm doing something you might be interested in. And it was Tom. And I actually worked 20 hours a week here and 20 hours a week for We Are Family for, 6-7 years. So Tom had started We Are Family in 95, and then in 96, we had opened the first safe space group downtown. It was on Spring Street, 93 Spring. And then AFA began in 98. And initially, we actually had talked to Tom and about the possibility of, do we do something sort of underneath the We Are Family banner? And then realized that we were going to be doing, a lot different kind of work, and so ended up going in a different direction. But Tom was actually one of the founding members of AFA as well. So it was about 2.5 years between the time Tom had started We Are Family and most organizations, social justice events that happen for humankind. It's about a personal commitment that happens. So, Tom's son, Thomas, is gay. And Tom was struggling with, some of the organizations that were already supporting parents of LGBTQ kids, and decided if somebody was going to do something here in Charleston, he was going to do it on his own. So he did, and started We Are Family, which is kind of like the same thing we ended up doing in '98. But yeah, it was. He was really a great part of that whole beginning, and personally for me, just was a great mentor through the years. Yeah, he was an extraordinary person.
We have time maybe for one more. Yep, over here, Greg. Greg, there you go.
Well, I just want to say I'm not a member of this parish, but I was very kindly invited by Dorothy Porcher Holland to attend this forum this evening, and I just want to say thank you for providing a space for LGBTQIA individuals to come and worship and experience, the fundamentally good and wonderful aspects of, Christianity under all of its umbrellas. And I've been very fortunate to have been exposed to both Jim and Warren Reverend from a very early age. I went to school with their son Christopher, and just knowing, I grew up Roman Catholic, so there's been a lot of, I've had my own struggles with religion throughout my life, and just knowing that there is a space with people here who are, so accepting and way, way, way ahead of their time in terms of the way that religion is evolving and changing is just a wonderful thing to know that we have in our community. And I'd also, like to thank, the Black and African American community in our city who, and throughout the world, who have really been at the forefront of a lot of inclusivity for all peoples and paving the way for other people to have their voices heard. So really, I would just like to say thank you to everyone here at this parish and for all the work y'all do. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
That comment brings to mind the word intersectionality, which I think we're talking about a lot more today. And this panel, this conversation tonight has reminded me of our high calling at St. Stephen's to strive each and every day, as Warren reminds us. It's not a box we check off, right? It's a decision that we make in faith each and every day to choose to be a house of prayer for all, walking in love as God in Christ graciously and abundantly loves us. Thank you so very much to all of our panelists. And please join us on this beautiful evening for a reception on the lawn so we can continue the conversation. Thank you so very much for being here tonight.